Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Totalbiscuit. Welcome to another in our interview series, and this time we have not one but two games from the same company, specifically from Larian, and it's my pleasure to introduce you Larian's founder, Sven Vincke, who will be talking to us about Divinity Original Sin and Dragon Commander. Welcome to the show.
Hi, John.
How is everything going today? I heard you had a rather busy E3.
Yeah, it was pretty crowded. Lots of people came to watch our games, and we're very glad with it. We're a small studio, so any attention that we can get, we're very happy with.
That's always good. Now, for a small studio, you're actually working on two different games, and this is not the first game that you've made by any stretch of the imagination. You have a franchise that some people will be aware of, some people not. It goes by the name of Divinity, so why don't you give us a little bit of background into the series?
All right, so Divinity started with a game called Divine Divinity in 2002. And from that came another game, Beyond Divinity. Then we made Divinity 2 Ego Draconis, which wasn't that good. So we made Dragon Knight Saga out of that. And now we're making Dragon Commander and Original Sin, both set in the Divinity universe.
Now, you did mention, actually, that Ego Draconis wasn't very good, which is an interesting admission from the founder of the company. Why don't you tell us why exactly Ego Draconis ended up becoming the Dragon Knight Saga?
Well, when we were making Ego Draconis, we ran out of money, basically. So did our publisher. And so it had to be rushed to market. And we actually tried very hard to stop that from happening, but it happened. And then we set out to actually fix everything. And that's how Dragon Knight Saga came to be, which took us actually a year, to be honest.
Okay, so as regards to the setting, what is the Divinity setting for those who've never played the game before? What can they expect from it?
Divinity setting is medieval fantasy with a lot of humor in it, and which references to many typical fantasy things which people tend to enjoy. At least I enjoy them.
Right, so let's go into the first game that you are currently developing at the moment, which is Divinity Original Sin. So what's the concept behind that?
Well, it's funnily enough, since you asked me about the universe, Original Sin is actually back to the roots for us. So it's taking everything which was cool about the first Divinity, making it better, and adding a couple of things which we've never managed to do. The first Divinity was intended to be multiplayer, so we're adding multiplayer on top of Original Sin. It's also a game where you actually are invited to play cooperatively if you can, which should be fun. Since we're making it multiplayer, we're adding a game editor to it also, so that it will become, it'll have a longer lifetime, because if you finish the game and you enjoyed yourself on multiplayer, since we're telling a lot of story, you want to have new stories, and we can't make all the stories in the world, so we hope our fans will do that. And then it's also turn-based, which is also new. Previous games were all action.
Yeah, I heard about that. And that is really interesting thing, actually, because how on earth do you make an RPG that is co-op but also uses a turn-based combat system?
So it depends, because there's multiple cases. If you enter in combat together with your friends, then obviously it's easy to see how you go into turn-based. But if you're walking around and you enter combat while your friend is buying potions or whatever in town or accepting other quests, then basically the game allows your friend to continue playing while you actually go in turn-based. It's a strange twist of time, but it works remarkably well.
Yeah, that is actually surprising. I recall trying to play some of these 4X strategy games, the space strategy games back in the day, where you would have the battles which ran in a different time space to the actual game, and the whole game would have to actually slow down to make that work. Were there any technical challenges involved in making that happen?
It was a nightmare for the engineers, but they solved it. It's rather interesting. So basically what happens is, suppose you're fighting in turn-based combat, and I went to rescue some damsel in distress, and then I join your area, then I'm actually going to walk into your turn-based combat, and then I become part of it. And this is happening in the same world setting, so there's no different levels or different loading things going on to mask it. It works well. I mean, it feels very natural when you're playing it.
Interesting. We'll see how that ends up working out in the game. So, to go into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of Original Sin, you're touting it as having class-free character development. How exactly does the system work?
Well, Divinity games always had class-free character development, so sticking to the series, stuck to the class-freeness. Basically means you can be a bit of a mage, a bit of a warrior, and a bit of a ranger if you want, or you can go full-blown all ranger skills. It really depends on your style of play. It's very much a return also to games like Ultima at the time, Ultima 7. And there you didn't have a real class system either. I mean, you just picked whatever spell interested you, and then you tried to make a character build out of that worked for you in the game.
Now, there are a few interesting features here that I haven't really seen used all that much before. The idea of a cooperative dialogue system, for instance. The fact that you don't have to agree with the person you're with, which is probably a good thing, because if I'm honest, the kind of people I play this game with, there's no way in a million years I'm agreeing with their choices. But how does that actually work mechanically?
So the basic idea was to bring back that tabletop RPG feeling. So where the party doesn't necessarily have to listen to one person. They discuss about what decisions they're going to make. So that's where it comes from. And the way it's done is our writers have been writing dialogue that bifurcates. And so, for instance, you could say, well, I think that we should threaten this guy. And you can say, okay, let's go ahead, let's threaten him. And the guy goes into the threatened state. And now we can ask him, well, give us all your gold. And I say, well, I think we should have all of his gold. And you can say, well, that's taking it a little bit too far. I don't want to do that because my charisma will be affected by it. Well, actually, my attitude will be affected by it. And that might have consequences for me. So then there's a roll of the dice that's going to go on, and depending on what the type of conversation, I could try to intimidate you, I could try to charm you, should I want to, and so forth.
Now, aren't you concerned that this kind of system might affect the pacing of the game, because it seems like an awful lot of arguing amongst yourself and not a lot of gameplay?
It's up to you how you want to play it. I mean, you can select to have one single party leader, and then you don't do it, but it's actually it was inspired to be done to play with your girlfriend, for instance. You know, you're playing two roles on the same on two screens. Sorry, and you have discussions. You have interesting discussions which relate to real life, and it's role playing.
Yeah, the one thing that I definitely would want out of a game like that if I was playing with my girlfriend or wife is the ability to both virtually argue and argue in real life. That sounds like a wonderful thing, being highly experienced with that. Now, the turn-based combat system is a new thing for you. How exactly does it work, and are there any parallels to be drawn between this and the original Divinity games, even though you've taken it out of real-time action and into turn-based?
So it's actually back to turn-based, because originally it was a turn-based system, but then our publisher at that time decided that hack and slash was more fanciful based. So I've actually tried pitching turn-based games 3 times already. So now that we're self-publishing, I can finally do it.
Nice.
I'm sorry, I forgot your original question now. Why turn-based?
Well, one, why turn-based? And 2, can players of the originals expect any parallels between the combat system of the original games and the turn-based one? Will it feel familiar even though it's different mechanically?
No, I think it'll be different because what will feel familiar is the fact that you can interact heavily with your environment, which was one of the strongest features of the first game. And here it's being used much more in combat than it used to be in the original Divinity. But otherwise, we have the combining of all the elements and the environment, and that's very different. We haven't done that before.
Okay. Aren't you concerned that your long-time fan base, bearing in mind, a franchise like this, I think, lives or dies based on its die-hard fans, aren't you concerned that they're going to be alienated by this rather drastic change?
I think we actually have our fan base despite our combat system.
Well, it's that way, is it?
Yeah, that's it. So our combat systems haven't been very good in the past, and so I think this time we have something which might be good, but you'll have to see when we release the game.
Something engaging. Okay, fair enough. Now, can you give me a few examples, without being too spoilerish, I suppose, maybe even just come up with a hypothetical, of some of the choices and consequences that end up being put in front of you in this game? It's something that you are touting. It's something that a lot of RPG players really like. Recent games like Dragon Age and The Witcher have made you make hard choices. What kind of thing can we expect here?
All right, there's 2 different types of choices to start with. There's the choices that affect the world and the NPCs that live in it. And then there's also the personal choices between you and your party members. I mean, those are 2 different things, the way that we treat them. I'll give you the example that we've shown at E3. It was really a straightforward example. You walked into somebody's house, and she was being threatened by a mad, suicidal skeleton bomber which was going to explode himself at the moment that you were going to approach too closely. And so he kindly asks you to leave the place. And so you can have a discussion with one another if you're going to actually approach him or not. And if you do that, you basically blew up an entire side quest, which you can then solve in a different way also. But you could also try freezing the guy, for instance, in which case she can escape and then you can blow him up, which doesn't have any bad consequences, and then you talk to her. That's just a small example. But I mean, if I want to explain you more, I have to give you all kinds of backstory.
Which we will just avoid the spoilers, I think. Sounds like a good idea. People tend to get very upset when that kind of thing happens. Now, that sounds like a pretty difficult choice, honestly, but you did mention it's very much a humorous kind of world. So is that presented in an amusing way, or is it as dire as it sounds?
The rule we have in the company in general is try to not put humor in it. It happens automatically.
Oh, okay.
The moment you try to put it in there, it becomes over the top. So if you just check out stuff that we've done in the previous Divinities, you'll find plenty of stuff on YouTube about stupid things that we've done and which were funny.
Stupid things indeed. Now, you have jumped on board with the idea of allowing people to create their own adventures. There's a tool set available. I've got to say, from the screenshots that I've seen of the tool set, it does look just a little bit complicated. Am I just being an idiot, or is this something that you're going to have to spend quite a lot of time learning to get anything good out of?
Yeah, it's an RPG creation toolset, and it's the same toolset that we're using. So you'll need to spend some time with it to be able to make something. Anybody that tells you can make an RPG just like that is lying, in my opinion. So, that being said, people who start working here and work with a toolset, within a day, they're making their first quests. So you need to invest yourself in it, like if you would do anything, I guess you need to invest yourself in it. And once you've done that, you should be able to pretty fast make things. Because, I mean, as I said, we're a small company, so we wouldn't be able to make the large RPGs that we do if we wouldn't have a good system behind that.
You mentioned that it's the same kind of tool set that you use. Are there any limitations on this thing, or can they do everything that you do?
They can do pretty much everything that we can do without having the source code in their hands. So what they can do is change every single part of the story, change all the dialogues, create new items, put in new characters, import new artwork, create pretty much any world they can think of. So that's quite a lot, actually. What they can't change is the combat system, at least not at this point. They can't, they can actually, I think they can modify the interface because it's using Flash.
Okay.
I just have to check if the exporting is actually done in a way that would accept normal Flash files. So, but it's pretty much what we have in-house. So we are not going to be the ones who are going to be milking people with DLCs, that's for sure, because people will be making it themselves.
So there are absolutely no plans for DLC whatsoever for this title?
We'll make stories, and then we'll try selling those stories, but we're not going to be doing small items because people will be making them themselves. Okay. One thing we'll do, however, is we'll screen the main storyline from the modding, so people will be able to make their own stories, but we'll want to probably put stuff on top of the main storyline. So, and if we open that up, then it becomes a big, gigantic mess, probably.
That's very true. And how easy do you think it's going to be for people to distribute these mods? It sounds all well and good, but if it's difficult to install a mod, if it's difficult to share a mod with your friends, especially if you wanted to both play the same thing in multiplayer, then it doesn't end up working so well. Do you have any facilities in place to make that easier?
It should be as easy as you hosting a game, selecting what you're going to play. The other player automatically gets synchronized with all the data that he doesn't have, and you start playing. And it'll also be available through Steamworks, most likely.
Okay, then. So the question, I suppose, is, do you have a release date for this title yet?
Somewhere next year.
Somewhere next year, yeah. So it's taking a while.
It's the very idea behind us going independent and publishing ourselves is not to release the games too prematurely. It's what happened to the previous game, so we try to avoid that this time.
Absolutely. Now, let's move on, shall we? Because Dragon Commander is something of a departure for you guys. You've created Divinity games. This is still part of the Divinity universe, but it's difficult to really describe from looking at it. It seems to be something of a genre mash. So why don't you try and break down what Dragon Commander actually is? Okay, so maybe let me first explain what the idea is behind Dragon Commander, because if I start breaking it down, then we're going to talk about the genre mash again. Literally, the thing that you are in Dragon Commander is a Dragon Commander. So you do the things that a Dragon Commander does, or at least that what we imagine a Dragon Commander is going to be doing. So he's going to make diplomatic decisions. He's going to make political decisions. He'll have to take about his romantic, his personal life.
He'll have to make strategical decisions. He'll have to decide what technology he wants to develop for his fleets. And then obviously he'll have to lead in combat by sending his fleet or deciding on the tactics of his fleet, and occasionally joining by becoming a dragon with a jetpack.
Yeah, just the normal everyday things that you would expect a dragon commander to do.
That's exactly it. I mean, we started thinking, okay, if you would be a dragon commander, what would be the things you would do, and what would be fun to do? Pretty much like people used to think before we talked about genres, when we were back in the 90s, when the Cinemaware games were coming out. Cinemaware, sorry. You had King of Chicago or Defender of the Crown. Those were games which were more about the experience than saying, well, I'm a first-person shooter with squad gameplay or whatever. So it's really, what does a Dragon Commander do? And from there then comes the idea that people say, well, it's a mix of genres. It is, but it's not really set up as a genre game. So you have some dominantly it's a strategy game, if you want to put it in a genre.
Yeah, it seems close enough to that. You do have some top-down, almost grid-based deployment, build bases, attack the enemy, and that's all done in real time. But you do also have this third-person system where you can actually become the dragon.
Yeah, so it's so you have your tactical control. You can just switch to top-down or 3D controls, like Homeworld if you want. And then you can select to have your dragon appear in the sky and aid your units in combat, which when you're playing it comes very naturally, but we've figured out that trying to communicate it to people is pretty hard. Why you would do that?
Yeah, it seems like it would be. There's a risk with a game like this, honestly. I've heard of games that have tried this kind of genre mashing before. The problem is that if you become something of a jack of all trades, you essentially become a master of none, and the gameplay systems don't necessarily mesh well together. Some are weaker than others. Are you concerned about that affecting the game?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been iterating over this game. I mean, both Original Sin and Dragon Commander have been in development for 2 years already, and so we haven't been sitting idle during all that time. And it's being played daily in multiplayer, trying to perfect the balance between the things. And yes, there is that danger, of course. I mean, but what would you do if there wouldn't be a challenge?
It's very, very true. So let's go through the sections one by one and have a brief breakdown of how they work. Now, the first most obvious section, I suppose, that people want to know about is third person, flying around on a dragon, which I've got to say from the screenshots looks like it may or may not be wearing some kind of jetpack, which is curious, I've got to say. So why don't you explain, one, how that works mechanically, and two, where technology actually comes into play in a world where you've got dragons?
Okay, so that's a lot of questions bundled into one. Let's start with the last part of your question. We said it very early in the Divinity universe, because that was very easy to do, and a time when there was a lot of magic and technology within the world. And there's several factions in that world, and some of them are very technology-oriented, some are very religious, magic-oriented, and so forth. So that's where your technology is coming from and your magic is coming from, and we figured that the jetpack would make a lot of sense in there. The jetpack actually originated because we needed something to transport the dragon even faster than he could already go over the battlefield, because he had to aid his units which were in need, which was then even augmented with a teleportability. He also has the ability to slow down time, actually. That only appears in single player, so when you're using the jetpack you have a button that you can press which slows down time, brings basically into bullet time, which is also pretty handy. So to come back to the first part of your question, how does the mechanics work? Pretty much the idea is that once you've given orders to your troops, you assist in whatever way you think is tactically the most interesting with your dragon. So it might be that there's some artillery coming towards your fleet, which is fighting with another fleet of what we call hunters. They are very fast shooting units. And by the time those artilleries are going to be there, if you're, let's say, the equivalent of tanks, haven't finished off with the hunters, the artillery is going to destroy your tanks. So what you would do with your dragon is you would fly towards the artillery at a jetpack speed and engage it, which might disrupt your enemy while your tanks are massacring the hunters of the enemy. That's just like a very small slice of the gameplay that you get.
And when it comes to the third-person controls, what kind of flight mechanics are we looking at here? If you could draw a comparison, I suppose, to another game, how does the dragon fly?
flies like a helicopter because it can end in midair, and then so it's very controllable. That there's no inertia or real physics behind it, because otherwise it's uncontrollable given the strategy. We tried that, but when we did that, people got very confused because they had to switch to third person or to tactical or strategical control, and they didn't know where they were anymore. So we had very simple flight mechanics on the Dragon, and that feels the best actually.
Now let's move on to the real-time strategy component of it. It does actually have some base building in it, which is not something we've really seen through the media so far. Can you explain how that all works?
Yeah, so that actually started out as a tryout, because we said, okay, let's put in some base building, see what it gives to the mechanics. And it's something that we're still experimenting with. So I don't want to give too much details about how it's going to work. No, just let me keep that for another time. It's going to be in there. The way it's going to be is probably not going to be exactly how we've shown it at E3, because we've been experimenting further and we found something good. But we're still working on that.
Now, something that drew me to the game initially was the fact that I rather like trading card games, and I noticed there are card mechanics within this, so I'm instantly interested. How does that play into it? How does the card system work?
You must be telepathic or you have some spy in our studio, because the reason why that base building has been modified is because of the trading card system. So cards are favors. You gain them by doing things outside of combat, sometimes occasionally by winning combat also. By doing political things, diplomatics, you can buy them also. And those cards can be used in what we call phase 2 of the game, which is where you actually do the strategy. Which countries are you going to attack? And you can play cards on countries to augment your fleet. So for instance, what we've always been showing so far is Imp-Buster technology. It's a favor which you got from the Imps, which gives you the equivalent of medieval nukes to use in combat. But it could also be a turn sides card, which would give you if you think of Command and Conquer Generals, kind of special power in combat. Yep. You can select enemy units and tell them to turn sides. And like this, all of these cards link you back to the story mode of the game, where through dialogue, through making decisions, you are going to be earning favors, and these you can then use strategically whenever you want to make the difference in combat. And so what happens then is when you're playing in multiplayer and you think you're going to defeat a country because you're arriving with an enormous armada, but the other guy has been cleverly setting up his cards, things might be very different than you expect them to be, which adds for a lot of fun, of course.
Now, the favor system is all linked in with the idea of diplomacy and making decisions which actually impact the campaign. One of them seems to be the idea of cheating on your dragon wife of some description. I'm noticing that you're being chastised. There's a screenshot here. You know what? We're going to actually throw this up on the screen right now for the viewers, because this is rather amusing. You're being chastised by a guy made entirely of bones. Is this a standard thing for the Divinity universe, or is this guy just a special character? Or do we have a lot of people that are wandering around made of bones and arguing about your marital affairs?
One of you were asking about humor first, and one of the pivotal moments in the first Divinity, without knowing it, that we've made was two skeletons discussing about why do we exist, and the further they went into the matter, the harder it was for them to stay together. So you just look it up on YouTube also, that one. It's pretty well known. Anyway, so yeah, skeletons, the undead, they are one of the factions, and they can be your allies or they can be your enemies. They're religious fundamentalists, so you have to treat them with a little bit of care. And in general, if you do whatever they want, then the other factions are going to be angry at you. But they can bring you many, many, many benefits.
I'm still trying to get over that. How much do you do about managing the daily affairs of what a dragon would do? I mean, we're talking about a dragon marriage here, not exactly a common feature in games. What other kind of things do you have to worry about when it comes to being a dragon on a day-to-day basis?
There's actually... I should show you our wall. We have a wall here which features all the choices and consequences that you have in Dragon Commander and what effects it has. It's pretty large. It's a pretty large wall with a lot of little dots on there. And there's plenty of things. I mean, it's real politics. It's inspired by real life politics. So we actually took newspapers and went through them and said, how can we make a fantasy version of this? So we got a whole range of subjects in there. And we have a nice systemic environment in which we could place this. And so we did that. And actually, but I'm not going to say which ones, but actually each of these factions is modeled on political parties that we all know.
Oh, really?
So it's a rather interesting one, because we took their campaign programs, we matched them to the issues that you're going to be dealing with at the political level. And then we said, okay, they would vote yes, they would vote no, they would vote yes. And that determines how the factions act in the game. And it gives you very surprising results when you state it as should dwarven nudists be allowed to walk on elven beaches. So you get stuff like that. That's the silly stuff. But then there's also more thought-provoking or interesting stuff. In the 3 demo, we show the situation where you have to discuss if you're going to draft prisoners into your army. And you're going to force them to be in your front lines. I mean, if you do that, you get a card, actually. You get those extra prisoners to help you in combat, and they can aid you. But there's moral problems with that, which the other factions are going to engage against. And so like this, you have a train of decisions and combat going on turn by turn.
Interesting stuff. Now, the last thing I want to discuss as regards to Dragon Commander, before inevitably asking you for the release date, at which time you will say that it's not ready yet, is that this game also has both co-op and PvP multiplayer. Now, what interested me is that it's in both the campaign mode and the skirmish mode. Does that mean there's PvP multiplayer in the campaign, or is it just co-op, say, similar to the Total War series?
No, that's it. It's exactly the opposite. It's PvP or co-op, depending if your faction allies with another faction. So the entire game is based on a board game we made. Mm-hmm. And in that board game, you had all the combat, which you would goes like you would expect it to go. But you also had this dragon unit that you could put in other people's combat. So if I would be attacking you and our 2 friends would be sitting at a table, they could bring their dragon into our combat to annoy one another. Okay. So campaigning, which is going to last you quite a couple of days, can be done against each other. Skirmishes is if you just want to play like for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so.
And this does not have a release date yet, if I'm correct. Is that also sometime in 2013, or can we be expecting this year?
To be in 2013, but early 2013. It's going to be before Original Sin.
Early 2013, before Original Sin. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there is your breakdown, your introduction to the Divinity series. Admittedly, if you do want to check out Divinity, you can have a look at the replacement for Ego Draconis, the Dragon Knight Saga, which is currently available. You can grab that on Steam. Pretty much every popular digital distribution platform actually has that one. And of course, you can go and check out the websites for both of these titles. We've got DivinityDragonCommander.com is the place to go if you want to find out more information about Dragon Commander. And if you want to find out more about Original Sin, it is DivinityOriginalSin.com. Not exactly difficult to explain. One last question before you go. How many dragons do you have anyway? There's a number in your webcam shot at the moment.
I was talking, you were talking about the dragons in the game. I actually have a dragon suit also, which you don't want to go into detail.
I was going to say, why exactly do you have a dragon suit? Do we not want to know about that, or?
You'll see very soon. We're making a series of movies, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there's you will be introduced to Patrick the Dragon and what have you. So expect that very soon.
That I'm now looking forward to that. I really am. I want to know what nonsense you've got up your sleeve in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, a look at Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Dragon Commander. My name has been Totalbiscuit. Sven, thank you very much for coming on the show today and talking about 2 upcoming titles. Keep an eye out for them in 2013, folks, by Larian. And if you want into the Divinity universe before that, go and check out Divinity 2 Dragon Knight Saga over on Steam and all popular digital distribution platforms. And the originals, if I recall correctly, are currently available on GOG. We'll see you next time.